The council chamber fell into uneasy silence as the communications display flickered with Terra's formal request. Supreme Commander Zolvek studied the message with all four of his eyes, his scaled skin shifting from ashen gray to a contemplative blue-green. This human transmission contains technical specifications for their vessel, he noted, mandibles clicking with surprise. Unusual for a first contact protocol. Science Officer Gazelle Mora leaned forward, her crystalline appendages refracting light across the tactical displays. The specifications must be fabricated. No vessel of this size could maintain structural integrity at the velocities they claim. Her voice carried the dismissive tone of someone who had categorized and discarded the information already. Ambassador Threll of the Centauri Collective, his holographic form shimmering with skepticism, spoke next. We have monitored Terra for decades. Their technological progression follows a predictable curve. They have barely mastered rudimentary fusion power, and their space stations require constant maintenance. What could they possibly offer against an enemy that consumes stars? The tactical display shifted again, showing another Alliance battle group disintegrating under void attack. 3 capital ships and their escort vessels, 17,000 lives, vanished in seconds. Zolvek's secondary heart began its stress rhythm. We lose another system every rotation. Our most advanced weapons barely penetrate their defensive fields. Their energy beings consume our people and grow stronger. He straightened his ceremonial armor with a decisive gesture. I will not refuse any potential ally, no matter how unlikely their usefulness. Admiral Krevash bristled, her exoskeleton emitting warning pheromones. Commander, protocol demands thorough security screening for any unvetted species entering Alliance space, especially during wartime. These humans could be Void sympathizers or unwitting puppets. Do the Void need puppets when they're winning so decisively? Countered Zolvek, gesturing at the death toll scrolling across the main display. 6 billion lives lost this cycle alone. The Andromeda colonies completely overrun. The Void doesn't employ deception. It simply consumes. The diplomatic minister from Altair Prime, her avian features arranged in an expression of careful neutrality, offered a compromise. Perhaps we might permit a small delegation to present their case via secure transmission before granting physical access to Alliance Command. Zolvek considered this, then shook his head. Time works against us. The Void advances 16% faster than our most pessimistic projections. I will meet these humans personally. His voice dropped to a resonant bass that signaled his invocation of emergency powers. Prepare a secure docking bay and appropriate atmospheric adjustments. As the council members filed out, Tactical Officer Vrendar lingered, his tentacles arranged in the pattern denoting confidential communication. Commander, our deep space monitoring outposts detected unusual activity in Terra's solar system before they went dark last cycle. Something massive displaced significant stellar matter near their 4th planet. The readings were inconsistent with known physics. Zolvek's membrane slid over his eyes, a gesture of contemplation among his species. Inconsistent with our known physics, perhaps, he murmured. Prepare a full security detail for our visitors, but ensure they're treated with diplomatic courtesy. After a moment's hesitation, he added, and Vrendar, have our quantum analysts re-examine all anomalous readings from the Terran system over the past 50 cycles. I want to know if we've been missing something. As the commander turned to leave, the emergency klaxons sounded once more. Another Alliance world had fallen to the void. Ambassador Helena Chen stood in the Alliance docking bay, remarkably comfortable despite the adjusted atmospheric conditions. The Alliance security detail maintained a respectful distance, their weapons not quite pointed at the human delegation, but certainly not holstered either. Chen's silver hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her diplomatic uniform notably lacking the ornate embellishments typical of Alliance formal attire. Your vessel's approach vector was unconventional, stated Commander Zolvek, mandibles clicking with what might have been either irritation or intrigue. Our tracking systems lost and reacquired your signature 17 times during your approach. Chen smiled politely. The Prometheus employs what we call probability tunneling. The ship exists in multiple potential states simultaneously until observation collapses the waveform. She spoke as if describing something as ordinary as weather patterns. It's more efficient than conventional FTL, though it does confuse standard tracking algorithms. Science Officer Xelmore's crystalline appendages vibrated with obvious skepticism. That's theoretically impossible. The energy requirements alone would. Perhaps we could continue this discussion somewhere more suitable. Chen suggested gently, gesturing to the three humans who accompanied her. A tall man with dark skin and ceremonial facial markings, a younger woman with intricate tech implants visible at her temples, and an older individual of indeterminate gender whose eyes seemed to shift color with the lighting. Zolvek led them to the command center, where tactical displays showed the ongoing dissolution of Alliance defense lines. Alliance officers stared openly at the humans, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. As you can see, Ambassador Chen, our situation is dire, Zolvek stated bluntly, gesturing toward the holographic representation of the front lines. The void entities consume organic matter and convert it directly into energy. They're not just killing our people, they are using them as fuel. Chen studied the tactical display with surprising intensity. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the control interface. After a hesitant nod from Zolvek, she approached the console. The younger woman with temple implants stepped forward, placing a small device on the edge of the tactical table. "Commander, with your permission, we'd like to deploy our observational assets to gather current battlefield data." Admiral Krivash bristled visibly. "Absolutely not. Our tactical systems contain classified Alliance defense protocols." "Your defense protocols haven't been particularly effective," noted the dark-skinned man quietly, his deep voice carrying no accusation, merely stating fact. Before Krivash could respond, Chen interjected smoothly. "We understand your concerns, Admiral. Our drones are passive observation tools only. They'll gather data on void energy signatures and composition without interfacing with your systems." Zolvek studied the humans carefully. Something about their calm confidence in the face of galactic annihilation struck him as profoundly unusual. Most species encountering the void for the first time reacted with terror or denial. These humans displayed neither. "Deploy your observers," he decided finally, "but they will be accompanied by Alliance monitoring probes." Chen nodded graciously. The younger woman touched the device, which hummed softly and then released what appeared to be motes of light. Dozens of them, scattering through the air before vanishing completely. "What just happened?" demanded Security Chief Rendar, tentacles flaring in alarm. "Where did they go?" "Their phase shifted," explained the older individual with color-changing eyes, speaking for the first time in a melodious voice. "They exist slightly out of sync with conventional space-time. The void can't detect them, and neither can conventional sensors." The command center erupted in protests and questions, silenced only when the tactical display suddenly transformed, showing void fleet formations in unprecedented detail, revealing energy currents, command structures, and most importantly, structural vulnerabilities that Alliance intelligence had never detected. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. These were not the capabilities of a primitive species, not by any measure. The secured chamber's atmosphere felt heavy with implications as Ambassador Chen's holographic display showed humanity's true historical timeline. The Alliance Council members sat in stunned silence, their expressions ranging from disbelief to dawning comprehension. "You expect us to believe," began the Andarian representative, his iridescent scales flaring with agitation, "that your species achieved spaceflight before most of ours had developed writing systems." Chen's expression remained serene. "We expect nothing, Representative. We simply offer the truth, however uncomfortable it may be." She gestured to the timeline displaying millennia of hidden human development. After the initial void incursion 15,000 years ago, our species made a collective decision to develop in secrecy. But why? Demanded Zolvek, leaning forward. Why hide your capabilities? Why not join Galactic society and share your knowledge? The older human with the color-shifting eyes, who had introduced themselves as Dr. Elias Morgan, Sino-historian, stepped forward. Because primitive species who encounter the void typically respond in one of two ways. They either worship the energy beings as gods, offering themselves as willing sacrifices, or they panic and attempt to use increasingly destructive weapons, often destroying themselves in the process. We chose a third path, continued Chen, her voice taking on a historical resonance. Careful study, methodical preparation, the development of specific countermeasures, but most importantly, patience. The holographic display shifted again, showing what appeared to be natural phenomena throughout recorded Alliance history. Unusual solar flares, unexplained asteroid field disturbances, cometary fragmentation events. Then the image shifted, peeling away the visual camouflage to reveal what actually occurred. Cloaked human vessels intercepting and destroying void scout ships. We've been out there all along, Chen said softly. Watching, protecting, preparing. Science Officer Xelmore's crystalline form vibrated with rapidly shifting frequencies, a sign of extreme emotional disturbance in her species. This violates every principle of diplomatic transparency the Alliance was founded upon. You've been conducting military operations in our territory for millennia without consent or oversight. The dark-skinned human, Fleet Admiral Morgan Blackwood, stepped forward, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. With respect, Officer Xelmore, if we hadn't conducted those operations, there would be no Alliance territories left to protect. The Void Scout ships we intercepted were precursors to full invasion fleets. Had even one reported back to the hegemony about viable consumption targets, the war you're fighting now would have begun millennia ago, before any of your species had developed the technology to resist. How convenient that we have only your word for this, hissed the Centauri representative. Chen tapped her device again, and the hologram shifted to show detailed records of thousands of intercepted void communications, translated and catalogued over centuries. Not just our word, their own. The scope of the deception and the implications of such long-term surveillance began to sink in among the council members. Some reacted with outrage, others with grudging respect, and a few with what appeared to be relief. There's another reason we maintained our secrecy, Chen added, her tone softening. Cultural contamination. History shows that when societies with vastly different technological capabilities interact, the less advanced culture is often destroyed or fundamentally altered. We wish to allow each species to develop along its natural path. Zolvek's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep purple, a sign of profound intellectual reassessment in his species. All this time, we believed ourselves to be among the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Chen smiled gently, and in many ways, you are. Technological development is just one measure of advancement. Your species have made unique cultural, philosophical, and artistic contributions that humanity greatly admires. She paused. But against the void, technological specificity is what matters now. Before anyone could respond, an urgent communication alert sounded. Void forces had launched a massive assault against the Alliance's final defensive line. The Alliance Command Center erupted into controlled chaos as tactical displays showed the approaching Void Armada. 3 massive carrier entities led the assault, each surrounded by swarms of smaller attack forms that pulsed with stolen life energy. Alliance officers rushed to battle stations while Commander Zolvek issued rapid orders for the evacuation of civilian populations from threatened systems. Fleet Admiral Blackwood stood silent amid the commotion, watching the tactical displays with a predator's focused intensity. When he finally spoke, the command center fell quiet despite the blaring alert signals. Commander Zolvek, with your permission, I'd like to coordinate a joint defense operation. His deep voice carried no urgency despite the dire situation. "Our vessels are already in optimal positions to counter the Void's approach vectors." Zolvek hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Tactical authority granted, Admiral Blackwood. Our fleet captains will acknowledge your command protocols." The main view screen shifted to a multispectral view of local space as the human vessels began to move. Rather than forming the standard defensive perimeter used by Alliance fleets, the human ships arranged themselves in what appeared to be a scattered random pattern. "What are they doing?" demanded Admiral Krivash. "That formation leaves critical approach vectors completely undefended." Before anyone could respond, the Void forces arrive, their massive carrier entities surging forward exactly along those supposedly undefended vectors. As they reached the midpoint between the human vessels, Blackwood tapped a simple command into his wrist device. The scattered human ships suddenly emitted synchronized energy pulses that connected between vessels, creating a three-dimensional lattice of coherent energy. The Void entities caught within this energy web writhed in apparent distress as their normally fluid forms began to solidify. "Phase lock engage," reported the female human with temple implants, whose name was apparently Lieutenant Commander Sato. "Quantum stabilization at 87% and holding. The Void entities are being forced into synchronized material states." The Alliance officers watched in stunned silence as the previously invulnerable energy beings became increasingly solid and defined. When the transformation reached some critical threshold, Blackwood gave a simple command: "All vessels, primary offensive systems, coordinated fire." The human ships discharged weapons unlike anything the Alliance had ever witnessed, not the expected energy beams or missile systems, but focused pulses that seemed to create localized distortions in spacetime itself. Where these pulses struck the now materialized Void entities, portions simply ceased to exist, the matter and energy apparently folded out of observable reality. "Targeted dimensional displacement," explained Dr. Morgan calmly, noting the shocked expressions of the Alliance personnel. "We're not destroying the Void entities so much as selectively removing portions of their materialized forms from our dimensional plane." The battle, if such a one-sided engagement could be called that, lasted less than 20 minutes. When it ended, the once fearsome Void armada had been reduced to scattered, disorganized remnants retreating in apparent panic. In the stunned silence that followed, Science Officer Exelmora finally found her voice. "That technology. It violates every physical law we understand." Her crystalline form vibrated with scientific distress. "How is this possible?" Chen smiled gently. "Not a violation, Officer Exelmora. An expansion. Your understanding of physics is entirely correct. Within its frame of reference, humanity simply operates within an expanded framework." Commander Zolvek approached Blackwood, his four pupil eyes studying the human admiral with new respect. "You could have deployed these capabilities at any time during the past months of conflict. Millions of Alliance lives might have been saved." There was no accusation in his tone, merely a request for understanding. Blackwood met his gaze directly. "Had we revealed ourselves earlier, the Void hegemony would have immediately committed their entire collective consciousness to this sector. We needed them to commit their forces gradually, in manageable portions." His expression hardened. "This was merely the first engagement, Commander. The real war begins now." The quantum transmission to Earth stabilized, creating a virtual environment so realistic that several Alliance representatives instinctively reached out to touch objects that weren't physically present. The virtual tour had taken them beneath the surface of Earth's oceans, revealing vast underwater complexes humming with advanced technology, through mountain ranges concealing massive shipyards, and into orbit, where seemingly natural satellites housed weapons platforms disguised as asteroidal bodies. "This facility," explained Ambassador Chen as the view shifted to an underground complex beneath a desert landscape, "was our first major research center dedicated to Void countermeasures." The virtual environment showed hundreds of humans working with equipment that made Alliance technology look primitive by comparison. It was established approximately 12,000 years ago, after we recovered and analyzed the remains of the initial Void Scout vessel. The Altarian representative, her avian features expressing skeptical curiosity, gestured toward a particular section of the facility. Those appear to be biological research chambers. Were you conducting experiments on the Void entities themselves? Chen nodded. The Void's physiological structure revealed their fundamental vulnerability. They exist as coherent energy patterns that can be disrupted if forced into material form. The challenge was developing technology that could affect entities that normally exist partially outside conventional spacetime. The virtual tour shifted again, showing historical records of human civilization during different eras. What fascinated the Alliance representatives wasn't just the technological development, but the social evolution. Early scenes showed human nations engaged in territorial conflicts and resource wars, gradually giving way to images of unified governance and common purpose. The Void threats served as a powerful unifying force, Dr. Morgan explained, their color-shifting eyes reflecting the changing historical scenes. National rivalries and ideological differences became increasingly irrelevant when faced with an existential threat to our entire species. Science Officer Excel Morris studied the human technology with growing comprehension. You specifically engineered your entire technological development path to counter the Void. Your propulsion systems, weapons technology, communications arrays, they're all optimized for Void interaction rather than following a natural development progression. Precisely, confirmed Chen. Our scientists determined early on that conventional technological development would never produce effective countermeasures against the Void. We needed to pursue specialized research paths, even if they seemed counterintuitive or inefficient for other applications. The virtual tour now showed human observation outposts hidden throughout the galaxy, concealed within nebulae, disguised as natural phenomena, or phase-shifted to remain undetectable. From these hidden positions, humanity had monitored both Alliance development and Void expansion for millennia. Commander Zolvek watched silently for several moments before addressing Chen directly. Your species concealed itself not just from the Void, but from potential allies. You watched as the Void consumed 17 Alliance worlds in the past year alone. You could have intervened earlier. Chen met his gaze with unflinching directness. We did. She gestured, and the display showed footage of what appeared to be natural spatial anomalies, deflecting Void scout ships away from heavily populated Alliance core worlds. Without our intervention, the Void would have targeted your central planets first, rather than your outlying colonies. We've been redirecting their attention, creating buffer zones, and carefully managing the conflict to prevent total Alliance collapse before we could fully engage. Managing. Admiral Kree-Vash practically spat the word. You've been manipulating galactic events like pieces on a game board. Not a game, corrected Fleet Admiral Blackwood, his voice somber. A carefully orchestrated defense strategy spanning thousands of years. The stakes were simply too high for transparency. Before further discussion could unfold, Lieutenant Commander Sato interrupted with urgent news. Human long-range sensors had detected massive Void fleet movements. Their primary consciousness had been alerted to humanity's intervention, and they were mobilizing their full collective force. The real war had indeed begun. The combined war council aboard the Thermopyla grew tense as Admiral Blackwood outlined the coming offensive operations. The massive holographic display at the center of the chamber showed Void fleet movements across multiple sectors with unprecedented clarity. Beside Blackwood stood Lieutenant Commander Sato, her neural implants interfacing directly with the ship's tactical systems, providing real-time updates as new intelligence arrived. The Void operates on a hive mind principle, Blackwood explained, highlighting specific energy signatures within the holographic display. But it's a hierarchical structure, not a true collective consciousness. These larger entities, he indicated pulsing nodes of concentrated energy, function as command and control centers. They coordinate the smaller consumption units and process the absorbed life energy. Alliance Admiral Kree-Vash studied the display with growing comprehension. You're proposing a decapitation strategy, Target the command nodes rather than engaging the entire swarm. Precisely, Blackwood confirmed. Conventional military doctrine would suggest concentrating firepower on the largest threat, but with the Void, their apparent size is often inversely proportional to their strategic importance. The War Council spent hours analyzing attack vectors and defensive formations. Throughout the planning session, one thing became increasingly clear to the Alliance representatives. Humans approached warfare with a cold precision that bordered on prescience. They didn't merely predict enemy movements. They manipulated them, creating scenarios where void responses could be anticipated with mathematical certainty. As tactical planning concluded, the Council prepared to disperse to their respective commands. Before they departed, Chen shared one final piece of intelligence. Our deep space monitoring network has confirmed that the Void is committing approximately 60% of their total collective mass to this conflict. They recognize the existential threat our technology poses. When the Alliance commanders departed to prepare their forces, Commander Zolvek remained behind with Blackwood, studying the human admiral with thoughtful intensity. "There's something I don't understand, Admiral," he said finally. "Your species clearly developed specific countermeasures against the Void millennia ago. Why allow the conflict to progress this far before revealing yourselves?" Blackwood's expression remained impassive, but something ancient and weary flickered behind his eyes. "The Void cannot be merely defeated, Commander. Not in the conventional sense. They exist partially outside normal space-time. If scattered or threatened, they can simply withdraw to regions beyond our reach and return centuries later." Understanding dawned in Zolvek's four-pupilled eyes. "You needed them to commit their collective mass, to bring it into our dimensional plane where it could be affected by your weapons. The Void has consumed countless civilizations across multiple galactic sectors," Blackwood continued. "We needed them to gather into a concentration sufficient for our ultimate countermeasure to be effective." He paused. "The forthcoming battles will not merely defeat the Void. They will end it permanently." The implication of such power, the ability to completely eradicate a trans-dimensional species, sent a shiver through Zolvek's scaled form. And after the Void is eliminated, what role does humanity envision for itself in galactic affairs? Before Blackwood could answer, Lieutenant Commander Sato approached with urgent news. "Admiral, long-range sensors are detecting unusual Void formations in the Proxima sector. They appear to be adapting their energy signatures to partially counter our phase lock technology." Blackwood nodded, unsurprised. "They're learning, as expected. Implement counter-adaptation protocols across the fleet." He turned back to Zolvek. "Your question about humanity's future role will have to wait, Commander. But I promise you this, we have no interest in domination or control. Earth has been a guardian in the shadows for millennia. We would prefer to step into the light as partners rather than conquerors." As Zolvek departed to ready his forces, he couldn't help wondering if other galactic powers would be given a meaningful choice in the matter. When a species wielded such overwhelming technological advantage, was partnership truly possible, or merely a more palatable form of subordination? The orbital defense platforms surrounding Earth activated in perfect synchronization as the first wave of Void entities materialized at the edge of the solar system. Massive gravitational lenses focused and amplified stellar energy into coherent beams that carved through the leading Void formations. The defense network operated with such precision that Alliance officers aboard Earth's command stations could only watch in silent admiration. "They bypassed our forward detection grid completely," noted Lieutenant Commander Sato, her temple implants pulsing with rapid data streams. "The Void has developed a new phase-shifting technique that allows them to transit undetected through conventional sensor arrays." Ambassador Chen nodded calmly, as though the arrival of an extinction-level threat at humanity's doorstep was a minor tactical development rather than a catastrophic breach. Adaptive countermeasures are being implemented across the system. The sole defensive sphere is recalibrating its detection parameters now. The command center's main display showed the combined human Alliance fleet forming a multi-layered defensive shell around Earth. Alliance vessels had been strategically positioned behind human ships, protected from the initial Void assault, while their systems were being rapidly upgraded with simplified versions of human defensive technology. Commander Zolvek stood beside Admiral Blackwood on the bridge of the flagship Thermopylae, watching the Void fleets approach with growing concern. Their formation is unusual, more concentrated than their standard consumption pattern. They're committing significant resources to this single attack vector. Blackwood's expression remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly. They've recognized Earth as the primary threat. This isn't merely a tactical strike. It's an attempt to eliminate humanity entirely. He tapped a sequence into his command console. All vessels, prepare for engagement protocol Omega. Phase shift generators to maximum amplitude. The human vessels began to emit a synchronized pulse of energy that expanded outward in concentric waves. Where these waves intersected with void entities, the normally fluid energy beings became partially materialized, vulnerable to conventional weapons. Alliance vessels opened fire with newly upgraded systems, their beams now capable of disrupting the void's physical cohesion. They're adapting faster than anticipated, reported Dr. Morgan, monitoring the void's energy patterns from a specialized console. Their central consciousness is redistributing mass to reinforce affected sectors. The battle intensified as the void pressed their numerical advantage, sacrificing smaller entities to overwhelm specific sections of the defensive perimeter. A massive surge of void attackers broke through the outer defense line, heading directly toward the Thermopylae. The flagship's shields flared brilliantly as they absorbed the first assault wave, but sensors indicated structural damage spreading through the vessel's midsection. Admiral, hull integrity compromised in sections 20 through 34, reported a human officer. Recommend immediate withdrawal and reconfiguration. Negative, Blackwood responded calmly. Maintain position. The Alliance cruiser Perseus is directly behind us with incomplete shield upgrades. They wouldn't survive direct void contact. He tapped another command sequence. Initiate adaptive reconfiguration protocol while maintaining defensive position. Alliance officers watched in astonishment as the severely damaged Thermopylae began to physically transform. Damaged sections detached from the main vessel, reconfiguring into autonomous combat drones that continued engaging void entities. The flagship itself seemed to condense, shedding approximately 30% of its mass while maintaining full combat capability. Zolvek had never witnessed anything like it, a starship that could dynamically reconfigure itself during battle, sacrificing size for continued functionality. Your vessel. It's self-modifying. All our technology is, Blackwood replied, focused on the tactical display. Static systems are inherently vulnerable. Adaptation is the fundamental principle of survival. As the battle reached its apex, the Void launched a concentrated attack against Earth's primary defensive grid, targeting power distribution nodes with unprecedented precision. For the first time, Blackwood's expression showed genuine concern. They've identified our defensive architecture far more quickly than we anticipated, he said quietly. Implement contingency protocol Lazarus. The final phase begins now. 6 months after the climactic battle of Earth, representatives from all Alliance worlds gathered in the newly constructed Concordat Hall, a breathtaking structure of crystalline arches and suspended gardens built on a terraformed asteroid in neutral space. The formerly sterile rock now bloomed with plant species from 100 worlds, a living symbol of cooperation and renewal. Ambassador Chen moved through the gathered delegates with graceful ease despite her age, exchanging greetings in dozens of languages. The respect accorded to her, and to all human representatives, was palpable. No longer viewed as primitive latecomers, humans now held a position of unique influence within the expanded Alliance framework. Commander Zolvek, recently promoted to Supreme Commander of Alliance Forces, found Chen observing a memorial wall listing the names of those lost in what historians were already calling the Void War. The elegant monument featured a central sculpture, a sphere of pure light contained within a geometric lattice, representing the essence of life protected by unified strength. The casualty figures would have been exponentially higher without your intervention, Zolvek acknowledged, standing beside her. Though I imagine that was precisely your calculation all along. Chen's smile carried the weight of centuries. There is no victory without cost, Commander. Humanity learned that lesson painfully during our first encounter with the Void. She turned toward the memorial, her eyes reflecting the soft illumination. When Protocol Lazarus was activated, we knew the price would be steep. The activation of Lazarus, humanity's ultimate contingency plan, had been the turning point in the final battle. As the Void breached Earth's outer defenses, thousands of previously hidden installations throughout the solar system had synchronized to create a dimensional anchor point, forcing the entirety of the Void Collective into materialized form. The subsequent engagement hadn't merely defeated the Void, it had fundamentally transformed them, converting their consumption-based existence into a stable energy state that could sustain itself through harmonic resonance with stellar bodies. The rehabilitation program for the transformed Void entities proceeds better than expected, Chen continued. They're beginning to communicate in comprehensible patterns. Some have expressed what might be interpreted as remorse. Zolvek's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. From existential threat to potential allies in less than a standard year, your species continues to surprise us. He hesitated before asking the question that had preoccupied Alliance leadership since the war's end. What comes next for humanity? Will you retreat back into secrecy now that the immediate threat has passed? Chen gestured toward the diverse gathering of species engaged in animated conversation throughout the hall. That was never our intention, Commander. Isolation was a necessary strategy, not a preferred state. Her expression grew solemn. Though I must be honest, the Void was merely the first of several extinction-level threats our long-range monitoring has identified beyond the galactic rim. Zolvek absorbed this revelation with remarkable composure. Then the Concordat comes not a moment too soon. Whatever threats await, we will face them as true partners. As formal proceedings began, Fleet Admiral Blackwood joined them, his ceremonial uniform adorned with symbols representing both human achievement and Alliance cooperation. The signing ceremony is about to commence, he informed them. Chen nodded and prepared to take her place, but paused to share a final reflection with Zolvek. For all our technological advancement, humanity's greatest achievement was maintaining hope through millennia of vigilance. We prepared for war while never abandoning the possibility of peace. She smiled gently. Perhaps that is the most important lesson we bring to the Concordat, that preparedness and compassion need not be opposing forces. As the galactic representatives assembled to sign the historic agreement, a subtle signal passed between the human delegates, a reminder that their ancient mission continued. Beyond known space, other threats still moved in the darkness between stars. But this time, humanity would not stand watch alone.